Welcome back to Weekly Wisdom with John Sampson. This is the show where we seek practical, timeless solutions to the relentless challenges of modern life by looking at the best of ancient philosophy, modern psychology, and neuroscience. If I could ask you one question right now, a single question to cut through the noise of your entire day, it would be this: what is enough? Enough money? Enough success? Enough stuff? Enough respect? The honest truth is, for most of us, we simply don't know. And that lack of clarity, that failure to pause and define your personal objective standard of sufficiency, is an enormous psychological burden that you carry. Think about it this way. If you don't pause to reflect and understand what is enough for you, then nothing will ever be enough, and you'll spend your life constantly running up a hill to nowhere. You're permanently signing up for a race with no finish line, chasing a feeling of contentment that you will never catch. We all know this feeling. Maybe you get a new promotion and a raise, and for 2 weeks you feel great. Then you look around the office, and now you're comparing yourself to the person in the next tier up. You were happy with your car until a friend pulled up in a newer, better model. I know this happens to me. I'll go to a friend's house that's new or bigger, and for the next couple of days, I find myself thinking that I need a new house, before I realize that I'm pretty comfortable in my current house. But that fleeting, almost addictive thought is the core of what today is called status anxiety. The chronic distress associated with maintaining our relative social standing and the fear of failing to meet society's perceived criteria for success. It's a pervasive modern malady, but it's not a new one. Some of history's greatest thinkers diagnosed this exact problem. Today, we're going to dissect this feeling of never enough by fusing Stoic, Aristotelian, and existential philosophy with cutting-edge brain science. First, we'll dive into the awful psychological and neurological loop that keeps you trapped. Then we'll unlock the ancient philosophical keys to self-discipline and contentment, drawing on the wisdom of Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and more. And we'll also look at the high cost of the chase through the tragic examples of Robin Williams, Heath Ledger, and Matthew Perry. Finally, we'll give you a practical 4-step plan to begin defining your true enough. It's time to get off the treadmill. Let's start with why we're on it in the first place. Let's dive in. The desire for things, for status, for recognition, is not inherently evil. We all have a natural desire for things, and that's good. It gives us drive to achieve. A drive for improvement is the engine of our civilization. The problem, however, is when the drive is not disciplined and the appetite is not satisfied, leading to a state where you're not controlling the desire, it's instead controlling you. Modern psychology and neuroscience explain exactly what happens when that drive runs unchecked and is constantly fueled by social comparison. It creates a self-reinforcing toxic loop. The cycle begins with status anxiety, which is fundamentally a chronic psychological state defined by the fear of being devalued or failing to meet social criteria. At the emotional core of this anxiety is profound shame, the fear of being judged and rejected by our peers. This fear-driven motivation leads to relentless striving. We chase external validation, wealth, power, reputation, believing that these external goods will finally bring us lasting security and self-worth. Here's where the trap locks. Hedonic adaptation, also known as the Hedonic Treadmill. When you achieve a goal, the new car, the promotion, the big house, your happiness spikes. But the human brain quickly adapts to this new baseline. The achievement quickly becomes the expected norm. The psychological satisfaction fades, and you're left requiring continually higher inputs and greater achievements just to maintain your baseline sense of self-worth. Psychologists call this the arrival fallacy, the delusion that a single major accomplishment will deliver permanent contentment. This mechanism is amplified in a world of high economic inequality and constant social media consumption, which increases the perceived contextual competitiveness and erodes social trust. You're constantly exposed to the curated highlight reels of others, and your life, by comparison, can feel inadequate. That chronic feeling of falling short is termed chronic inadequacy. Now, let's look under the hood of your brain. Status anxiety is not just a feeling. It's a physical, neurobiological state. From a neuroscientific perspective, status anxiety functions as a specific, pervasive form of social evaluative threat. When you feel this social threat, the fear of judgment or rejection, it immediately recruits and often dysregulates core brain systems. Status anxiety strongly activates the amygdala, the brain's fear center. This leads to a persistent state of apprehension and hypervigilance, essentially training your brain to see social situations, comparisons, and career moves as a source of threat rather than opportunity. Then you have the ventral striatum and reward anticipation. This area is key to the chasing more cycle. The ventral striatum is part of the brain's reward system, strongly associated with anticipating a reward, like the status a new promotion will bring, but it's much less activated when the reward is actually received. This is the biological substrate of the hedonic treadmill. The chase is chemically more rewarding than the catch. The resultant chronic psychosocial stress activates your body's central stress response system. Over time, this chronic stress leads to measurable biological consequences, including systemic inflammation. Status anxiety is quite literally a distinct public health risk factor. And crucially, status anxiety hijacks the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for top-down control, rational thought, and emotion regulation. When the amygdala is fired up by a social threat, the regulatory regions of the prefrontal cortex are recruited too late to preempt the emotional and visceral response. You know intellectually that buying a new house isn't what you need, but that feeling that you must have it overwhelms the rational control mechanism. The solution then is not found in achieving more, but in strengthening the top-down inhibitory control of the prefrontal cortex over the reactive amygdala, and cultivating a stable intrinsic source of value. This is precisely where the ancient philosophers come in. For the Stoics and the Aristotelians, the modern concept of enough was solved by one fundamental philosophical project, establishing the inner citadel, a self-governance so complete that no external event, no status, and no amount of wealth could disrupt your peace. They understood that the ultimate answer to what is enough is not found in accumulation, but in self-discipline. Let's look at the three most powerful philosophical frameworks for fighting status anxiety. Epictetus was born a slave, but became one of the most influential Stoics. And he offers us a radical defense against status anxiety, the dichotomy of control. He argues that all things in the universe can be divided into two categories. Things in our control, like our own judgments, our opinions, our desires, our aversions, and most importantly, our moral choices. This is the seed of true freedom. And then there are things not in our control. Our body, reputation, property, social status, and the opinions of others. Status anxiety is diagnosed as an acute psychological disturbance stemming from one fundamental error: mistaking elements outside of one's rational control for sources of happiness and self-worth. He taught that true sufficiency is achieved only when the individual focuses all energy on what is truly their own, their character, and their choices. The key to self-discipline is the discipline of assent, the power to withhold judgment and only accept those thoughts that are rational and true. When you feel the pull of status anxiety, you need to pause and ask, is this judgment about something I can control? If If the answer is no, you dismiss it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor, wrote his meditations not for publication, but as private reflections during military campaigns. His struggle against status anxiety was profound, given the immense pressure of his position. His self-discipline was built on two core practices. One, the insignificance of reputation. Marcus constantly reminded himself of the sheer fleetingness and worthlessness of fame. He viewed the frantic pursuit of posthumous fame as irrational, asking, "Soon you'll be ashes or a skeleton, and either a name or not even that." The logical conclusion is to never let the future disturb you, because if you focus only on the present, you will find strength. The discipline here is to anchor your value in the present virtuous act, not in a future external judgment by others. And defining sufficiency. Marcus provided one of the most practical answers to what is enough, writing, "Remember that very little is needed to make a happy life." He advised focusing on a few things to achieve tranquility and contentment. The self-discipline is to reduce your desire load, knowing that contentment is the greatest wealth. Centuries later, Adam Smith, the father of modern economics, added a crucial moral dimension to this conversation. Smith was deeply concerned with the psychological and moral consequences of ambition. He argued that the ultimate human desire is not for wealth itself, but for the esteem and approval of others. The rich man pursues wealth and status to naturally draw upon him the attention of the world. For Smith, true contentment comes from being worthy of praise, not merely receiving it. His central concept for self-discipline is the impartial spectator, an idealized internal standard, an objective and unbiased man within ourselves whose approval we seek. The good man aims to act in a way that this internal, rational judge would approve of, regardless of what the real world or wealth worshippers say. Smith warns that ambition often makes us exchange our true tranquility for a miserable pursuit, involving anxiety, disappointment, and the corruption of our own virtue. The act of self-command is to resist the temptation to pursue wealth simply to satisfy the vanity of others. Aristotle's philosophy provides the ultimate metric for defining enough. He began his Nicomachean Ethics by asking what the telos, or the ultimate purpose of human life, is. For Aristotle, wealth, status, and possessions are only instrumental aids. They're means to an end, not the end itself. Pursuing wealth and status as ultimate ends is irrational. When you chase money for its own sake, you're confusing a tool with the end itself. Aristotle's core teaching for self-discipline is finding the virtuous mean between two extremes. For example, courage is the mean between rashness or excess and cowardice or deficiency. Similarly, when dealing with wealth, we need to pursue practical wisdom to define the quantity of external goods that is sufficient for one's life and civic function. Enough is what allows you to live virtuously and flourish. Anything more is excess and a distraction. Seneca, despite his own great wealth, advocated for voluntary poverty as a practice of self-discipline. He argued that a life dependent on external goods like wealth and status is always a life in chains. His ultimate tool for self-discipline was premeditation of evils. This involves mentally rehearsing the loss of everything you fear to lose: your job, your wealth, your status. This directly addresses one of our core reflections for today. What if you lost your job today? What do you think you could live without? Seneca would argue that by confronting the worst-case scenario mentally, you prove to yourself that your happiness is not dependent on those external, fragile goods. It's a way to inoculate yourself against the shock of loss and anchor your confidence in the resilience of your inner character. he reminds us that it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor. The philosophers provide us the blueprint for the internal citadel. But what happens when the pursuit of external validation, the relentless need for more success, more fame, more recognition, overwhelms the inner life? We see the tragic answer in the lives of men who seemingly had everything by society's standards, yet found themselves utterly lost in the relentless chase. Robin Williams, Heath Ledger, and Matthew Perry all achieved the pinnacle of their profession, accumulating the very things society tells us will bring happiness: fame, wealth, and universal approval. Yet all three battled profound psychological challenges that were exacerbated, not alleviated, by their success. Robin Williams was a comedic genius and a boundless source of energy. But behind the laughter was a man battling severe depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. The pressure he faced was twofold: the external demand to continually deliver extraordinary performances, and the internal need to meet those sky-high expectations. His own words hint at the disconnect. He said, "I think the saddest people always try their hardest to make people happy because they know what it feels like to feel absolutely worthless, and they don't want anyone else to feel like that." Williams' life is a stark reminder that even universal acclaim, the highest form of social status, does not translate into intrinsic self-worth. The chase for the next performance, the next standing ovation, was simply a temporary fix for a deeper sense of worthlessness. Heath Ledger's career was marked by an intense, consuming pursuit of artistic perfection. He was known for transformative roles that required total commitment. As his fame rose, so did his internal and external pressures. Ledger struggled significantly with insomnia and anxiety, which worsened as he chased increasingly demanding roles and sought to maintain his rising fame. His profound dedication, which brought him critical success, was coupled with an equally profound psychological cost. He was quoted as saying, "I feel like I'm wasting my life. I feel like I'm just standing in the middle of a room screaming, and no one can hear me." This reflects a key insight from the status anxiety research. The intense, visceral response to social threat can create a paralyzing fear of failure and inadequacy, even when evidence suggests the contrary. Ledger's relentless striving for more artistic success ultimately consumed the mental peace he needed to survive. Matthew Perry, beloved for his role in Friends, grappled openly with addiction and the immense pressure to maintain his public image. His relentless striving was not just for professional success, but for the feeling of stability and peace that his fame and fortune never delivered. In his own words, Perry summarized the core conflict of the highly successful but inwardly tormented. "I was always trying to be the guy who was funny and charming, but inside I was struggling with a lot of pain and loneliness." His substance abuse became a maladaptive coping mechanism, a desperate attempt to find a moment of enough in the face of unresolved emotional pain. These stories are not meant to shame or diminish their legacies, but to serve as modern parables that confirm the ancient wisdom. External success, unmoored from internal discipline and self-worth, is a house built on sand. None of us are getting out of this thing alive. So be mindful about what it is that you're pursuing, and more importantly, understand why you're pursuing it. If your why is external validation, you're setting yourself up for the same kind of psychological turmoil. So how do we move from the toxic chase to a life of true contentment, a state of having enough? Well, we turn to the existential work of Viktor Frankl, who reframed the entire human drive. Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, argued that the primary motivation in life is not a will to power or a will to pleasure, but a will to meaning. In the concentration camps, he observed that survival was tied less to physical strength and more to a person who had a future-oriented purpose. Frankl offers the ultimate rejection of status anxiety. Success, like happiness, cannot be pursued. It must ensue. True success happens only as the unintended side effect of one's dedication to a cause greater than oneself. This perspective forces a critical existential reflection. I want you to run this thought experiment right now. Picture that you're on your deathbed. You're looking back at your life. What is it that you wish you had more of? Time with those you love? Money? Things? The universal existential answer for virtually everyone is time, connection, and meaning, not more status or possessions. This is the clarity we must bring back to the present moment. The solution to status anxiety is not to stop striving, but to recalibrate the source of your striving from external validation to intrinsic meaning and self-determination. Here are 4 concrete practical steps you can implement this week to begin defining your personal enough and reclaiming your inner citadel. 1. Practice voluntary discomfort as Seneca recommended. Choose one item you rely on heavily and go without it for 48 hours. Turn off your social media notification. Cook a simple, low-cost meal instead of ordering takeout. The purpose is not to punish yourself, but to prove your own resilience and autonomy. You demonstrate to yourself, I can live without this. My peace is not dependent on this comfort or status symbol. This practice strips power from the material things that fuel your comparison anxiety. 2. Define your non-negotiable sufficient budget. Status is often most acute in the financial domain. So define with ruthless honesty the minimum amount of money, time, and possessions you need to live a virtuous and flourishing life that meets your basic needs, your civic duty, and your personal responsibilities. Everything above that non-negotiable sufficient baseline, the extra income, the bigger house, the fancier trips, must be consciously designated as an instrumental good. If you pursue it, you must understand why you are pursuing it and know that your core happiness is independent of it. By quantifying enough, you stop chasing an infinite goal. 3. Build an intrinsic value system. Shift your focus from being judged to being useful. Start a meaning audit. Frankl identified 3 main pathways to meaning: through work, creating a work or doing a deed; through experience, encountering someone or something; and through attitude, the choice of attitude toward unavoidable suffering. Identify which of these pathways you can commit to today that is entirely divorced from money or recognition. Mentor someone. Volunteer your time. Commit to a difficult but meaningful task that no one will see. Logotherapy states that you should stop asking, what can I get from life? And start asking, what is life asking of me? This shifts your entire frame from external validation to responsibility, which is the only true source of dignity. And last, practice self-compassion over comparison. Remember that status anxiety is fueled by shame and self-criticism. When you catch yourself in a moment of self-comparison, the friend's new house, the colleague's promotion, interrupt the thought process. Instead of criticizing yourself, practice self-compassion. This means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer a struggling friend. This works on the neurobiological level by directly challenging the self-evaluative threat. Self-compassion is a mechanism for building stable, internal self-worth that is independent of external performance, thereby strengthening the regulatory control of your prefrontal cortex over the reactive amygdala. The race for more is a mirage. It will always be there, promising a happiness it cannot deliver. The true work of a wise life is to look inward, to apply that discipline, and to finally declare your own personal standard of sufficiency. That's the moment you step off the treadmill. That's the moment you truly become free. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Weekly Wisdom with John Sampson. Please be sure to subscribe, and if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, make sure you leave us a 5-star review. This helps us reach more people. If you want ad-free episodes, early access to future episodes, and the ability to offer ideas, submit questions for Q&A episodes, or interact with me directly, join us on Patreon. Head to our site, weeklywisdomwithjohnsampson.com, for today's show notes and those for all of our episodes. Until next time, thank you for listening.